In the distant reaches of the galaxy, past the luminous clusters of newborn stars and the vast, shadowed voids where even light hesitated, there existed a realm untouched by chaos, immaculate, ancient, and coldly magnificent. The crystalline Empire of Talaris stood as a monument to galactic supremacy, a place where perfection was not a goal. It was tradition. The very architecture of its capital world shimmered like frozen lightning, spires of translucent mineral stretching thousands of meters into the violet sky. Bridges of light-connected towers floated across gravity-defying platforms. The air itself shimmered with the hum of stabilizing fields, and the ground beneath one's feet resonated with a subtle pulse as if the planet had a heartbeat of its own. At the center of this shining jewel sat the Imperial Citadel, where the Empress ruled from her throne of reflection, a seat carved from the rarest starlight crystal, said to be mined from the collapsed core of a neutron star. And on that throne sat Empress Lyre, then the immortal flame of the Talaran people. Her name alone could paralyze dissent. Her presence in the Galactic Senate chambers, rare as it was, had silenced entire delegations. It was said she had never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence weighed heavier than screams. She had ruled unchallenged for nearly 2 centuries, not through brutality, but through calculated, elegant domination. To her, humanity was a footnote, a young species crawling from its gravity well, barely capable of interstellar travel. Her intelligence reports described them as erratic, emotional, aggressive. Their biology was inefficient, their culture primitive. She had skimmed a few intercepted transmissions, music, arguments, war films, curiosity, perhaps, concern. Not even remotely, but that was before they arrived. It began as most world-changing events do, not with explosions or blinding lights, but with a whisper, a coded signal, picked up by an aging border sentinel drone patrolling the edge of the Granus Expanse, a volatile zone thick with magnetic storms and gravitational warps. The signal was strange, not encrypted by modern galactic standards, not sent on the usual diplomatic channels. Instead, it used an old protocol, one so outdated it triggered a historical archive alert. The message carried no threats, no demands. It was a request. A simple, calmly worded message. To the honored Empress of Talaris, we request a diplomatic audience. This is Captain Myra Rain, envoy of the Terran Union. We come in peace. The council laughed. The nobles laughed. The entire Ministry of External Affairs considered it a well-crafted prank until the accompanying coordinates matched a ship on long-range scans. A single vessel, small, alone, waiting. The Empress did not laugh. Out of amusement and perhaps curiosity, she gave a rare command: grant the audience. Her voice was like the crack of cold glass. Her officials obeyed immediately. The humans, she mused, would no doubt arrive in some crude tin can, asking for trade or technological scraps. Let them come, it would be entertaining. And so they came. When the Terran ship entered Talaran space, the royal fleets didn't even consider it a threat. They deployed only a ceremonial escort, 4 battle cruisers, 2 destroyers, and a scribe ship to document the arrival protocol, but something unsettled the admirals. The human ship was small, yes, a Corvette-class diplomatic cruiser, but it moved with eerie precision. It didn't wobble through gravity tides, it didn't hesitate. Its engines pulsed with unfamiliar rhythm. It responded to all hails with calm professional tones. And then, at the edge of the Imperial docking ring, it stopped, hovered, awaited permission granted. The boarding ramp extended. Guards lined the platform, dressed in ceremonial armor, weapons charged but hidden. Every step had been choreographed to assert dominance without open aggression, and then she emerged. Captain Myra Rain, a human woman, average in height, modest in frame, yet every movement she made exuded control. Her gaze swept over the crystalline palace towers, not with awe, but with quiet observation, as if she were memorizing their layout for tactical use. Her uniform was stark black with dark gray trim, no medals. No armor, no flowing robes or colorful insignias. Just a single silver emblem over her heart. Earth. And yet she did not kneel. She did not lower her eyes. Instead, she bowed respectfully. Her voice was calm, unshaken by the chorus of alien eyes upon her. "Empress Lyravan," she said loud enough to echo across the glass-like plaza. "I come bearing truth and opportunity." For a second, the entire court held its breath. The Empress sat silently, still, watching. This human did not tremble. Her advisors glanced at one another. Was this ignorance? Foolishness? Or something more deliberate? The Empress slowly raised her hand. The audience would proceed, but already, something ancient and unspoken had shifted in that moment. A ripple in the still pond of an empire that had never been challenged, never truly been surprised. This woman, this Myra Rain, had not just stepped onto a foreign world. She had stepped onto a legend, and she had brought something with her that would shatter everything they believed about humanity. The grand throne hall of the Imperial Citadel, once bathed in cascading light from the prism glass domes above, suddenly dimmed, as if the palace itself sensed what was coming. The ambient energy lights lining the edges of the floor flickered, their hue shifting from soft gold to a watchful blue. Captain Myra Rain stepped forward. In her right hand, she held a smooth obsidian device, small enough to be mistaken for ceremonial. With a subtle flick of her thumb, it came to life. No dramatic sound, no fanfare, just a low pulse, like the first breath of something ancient awakening. Then, the hologram activated. First, a single object materialized in mid-air, a ship, sleek and massive, silhouetted against a backdrop of endless space. Its scale dwarfed anything the court had seen. Then came another, then another, and another. Within seconds, the projection expanded outward in all directions, forming a sphere of images that floated around. Myra like ghosts of steel. Dozens. Hundreds. 3,000 warships. Each one labeled with its Terran registry: TUFS Deliverance, TUFS Valiant, TUFS Whisperstorm, TUFS Nightfall, and beside the names, their classification: Dreadnought, Carrier, Interceptor Swarm Hive, Orbital Supercruiser, Black, Ops Null Frigga. Their dimensions scrolled briefly beneath each one, with numbers so large even Talaran. Scholars blinked in disbelief. The warships formed a precise grid in the holographic darkness, their movements choreographed like an army of silent gods. Their hulls bristled with weapons, their armor so dense it seemed to bend light. They loomed not like war machines, but like judgment incarnate, suspended in the void. And yet, the woman at the center of it all spoke with no pride, no cruelty, just clarity. "These vessels," Myra said, her voice calm and crisp, "are not here to conquer, they are not here to intimidate. But they are here." She let the words settle. Every breath in the chamber stalled. The shimmering projection spun gently above the court, casting reflections on the floor like orbiting suns. "Positioned at the edge of your claimed territory," she continued. "Their presence is not a threat, but a promise. A promise that humanity seeks peace, but does not fear war." A sound rippled through the chamber, not a roar, not even a whisper, but the collective realization of power, real power. The kind not spoken of. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself through violence, because its silence is already deafening. All eyes turned to Empress Leovan, and for the first time in her reign she was still. Her lips parted, only slightly. But that minute shift, that imperceptible breach in her sculpted control, caused her advisors to glance at one another in alarm. The subtle tightening of her knuckles on the armrest of her crystalline throne made the Minister of Defense's jaw clench. The Empress' voice, when it came, was like a blade pulled slowly from its sheath, razor-sharp, deadly calm. "This projection," she said, her tone cold enough to freeze oceans. "You expect us to believe it? That your people, mere hatchlings in the cosmic deep, have harnessed such scale of force?" Myra didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked upward, toward the vast crystal ceiling of the throne room, where stars shone through from the evening sky above. Then, she pressed a second button. It was so subtle, so unceremonious, that some didn't notice, but above the world of Talaris, everything changed. The sky, once a twilight lavender scattered with moons, began to darken, not from clouds, not from atmospheric anomalies, But from presence, a shimmering wave washed across the upper atmosphere like ink spilled across glass. And then, from behind the camouflage of active cloaking fields, shapes began to emerge, colossal, silent, watching 30 Terran warships each. Larger than the palace itself, decloaked simultaneously. Their hulls carried the deep gray of war-forged steel, with glowing veins of quantum plasma pulsing beneath their surfaces. The clouds parted around them like mist fleeing a predator. No weapons were raised, no engines flared. But their alignment was deliberate, surgical. They hovered in perfect formation above the capital. Like judges standing over a trial yet to begin, the Imperial fleet scrambled. Alarms blared from the palace towers. Across the capital, defensive batteries hummed to life, and anti-orbital systems surged with energy. Noble families sent encrypted. Distress signals, servants ran for secure vaults. Pilots rushed to their stations. Commanders barked orders that no one could hear over the rising storm of panic. And yet, Myra stood still, one hand gently lifted into the air. A gesture so casual, so composed, that it contrasted violently with the chaos unraveling around her. "They will not fire," she said, voice still unwavering, "unless you do." The moment froze. Even the Empress didn't speak. Her eyes locked on Myra's. Her breath came shallow. Her nostrils flared, not in rage, but in the strained focus of someone calculating, rapidly in a moment that could define civilizations. What she saw in Myra's face wasn't a threat. It wasn't even bravado. It was truth. These warships weren't summoned in desperation. They weren't gathered on a bluff. They had always been there, waiting. The chamber around her erupted into whispers. The nobles shifted in their seats. Some reached for ceremonial daggers, a last defense of pride. Others began murmuring about retreat, about negotiation, but Leervin didn't move, because what burned behind her cold, violet eyes wasn't just anger now. It was something far rarer. Something dangerous. Uncertainty. For the first time in centuries. The Empress of the Thousand Worlds did not know what move to make. And humanity, those primitive upstarts, had made the galaxy's most powerful empire. Later that night, beyond the reach of protocol and ceremony, Empress Leervin stood alone in the sanctity of her private hall of mirrors, a chamber reserved only for introspection, away from the eyes of nobles and the ears of spies. No guard stood at the door. No light touched the chamber save for the moonlight refracting through the walls of flawless crystal. It poured in like liquid silver, slicing the chamber into sharp-edged fragments of light and shadow. She stood before the center mirror, staring at her own reflection, but it did not return her gaze. Instead, the light bent around her in strange ways, splintering her image into 1,000 fractured versions of herself. Young Leervin, fierce and crowned in victory. Diplomat Leervin, calm and articulate. Ruthless Leervin, stained with blood from the Red Accord War. Queen of the Void, breaker of coalitions, mother of stability. All her faces stared back, and yet not one of them looked certain anymore. For the first time in her reign, perhaps in her life, she felt the weight of consequence, not merely for her empire, but for her own identity. The Teleran way had always been clear: dominate through precision, rule through perfection, crush any uncertainty with elegant force. But now a species she had barely given thought to had arrived, not begging for recognition, not grasping for scraps, but standing tall, calm, and prepared for anything. She whispered something to her reflection, but even the chamber refused to echo it. And then, with a wave of her hand, the mirror chamber dimmed, and she summoned her war council. Within the hour, the high generals assembled in the Hall of Command. They wore their ceremonial armor, tall and gleaming, designed more for intimidation than protection. The room smelled of cold steel, charged plasma, and old wars. Holographic maps hovered mid-air, displaying the new Terran presence at the Empire's edge. Each ship like a crimson dot marking an unspoken challenge, the admiral of the core sectors. Sharp-eyed warrior named Cho spoke first. His voice cracked through the chamber like thunder. "We must respond with force. Raise the battle fleets, cloak the second sun, deploy the singularity cannons, jam their communications. Let them choke on static until they retreat. Others nodded. A few slammed their gauntlets to the table in agreement. This is a bluff, growled General Arundel, commander of the Phantasm Arm. They show us 36 ships and claim thousands more? Child's tactics. They've played their only card. But as the voices grew louder, another group in the chamber remained silent, watching, waiting. They were not dressed for war. No armor, no ceremonial robes, just dark robes with silver-threaded insignia. Over their hearts, the mark of the Council of Whisperers, advisors, strategists, truth-keepers, the ones Lyervan actually listened to. Lady Venza spoke softly, barely more than a breath. They didn't fire. The generals turned toward her. They didn't cloak in response to provocation. They didn't scramble when we locked targeting grids. They showed discipline, control, restraint, and calculation, added Archivist H.R.N., one of the Empress' oldest confidants. They revealed only 30 ships in perfect formation. Not chaotic, not desperate, they did not beg, nor posture. This is not the first time they've done this. This is routine for them. Lyran said nothing. Her gaze hovered over the map, watching the edges where the Terran fleet lingered motionless, yet vast in implication. And what of the people? She asked finally, breaking her silence. An uneasy pause followed. Then the council initiated feeds from across the Empire. Public forums, social channels. Encrypted group discussions, every screen pulsed with energy, not panic. Not yet. But something close. Fear. And not fear of humans. As Lyervan expected. It was fear of their own ignorance. The citizens had watched the palace dim. They had seen the ships above the clouds. They had replayed the diplomat's words, dissected. Her calm analyzed her restraint. The illusion of Talaran's superiority, the unspoken bedrock of their identity, had cracked. And through that crack, questions spilled in. How long have they had this fleet? Were we ever the apex? What else have we missed? What does it mean if we are not alone at the top? The Empress closed her eyes for a moment. Myra Rain remained in the palace under diplomatic protection. The Empress hadn't granted her audience again, but she didn't need to. The human captain had already begun doing what centuries of envoys had failed to do. She was winning the people. She visited the Hall of Science, walking among Talaran scholars, exchanging theories on deep-fold propulsion and radiation harmonics. She spoke in the Senate chambers, where she took questions from young political apprentices, never dismissive, never condescending. She even walked the lower gardens where common citizens visited during planetary alignment festivals. She answered questions with patience, with sincerity. She never once gloated. Never once used the word victory. She wore no armor, carried no weapon. And yet, in every room she entered, the air changed. When asked why humanity had revealed its strength, she gave the same answer every time. Because peace built on silence is fragile. We would rather show our strength and test it through fire. It became a phrase printed on ribbons, whispered in forums, debated by philosophers. Peace built on silence is fragile. Weeks passed, then a month. The Terran fleet did not advance, did not retreat. Their presence remained, a constant reminder in the sky, like watchers, like guardians, like the hand that hasn't yet clenched into a fist. Then came the tragedy. It began in the outer province of Tylren, where a young, noble commander driven by pride and fear ordered a stealth drone to approach one of the Terran ships, not to attack, just to test its shielding, to collect readings, to see if the humans were truly watching. The drone never reached its target. The ship it approached, a TUFS Horizon-class gunship, issued no warning. It didn't fire. But its presence triggered a dormant failsafe built into its outer field. The drone disintegrated instantly. The blast rippled across Tylren moons, visibly. And worse. It triggered an automated Terran response relay. The fleet shifted, not to attack, but to realign. The 30 decloaked vessels expanded their formation, spreading over wider atmospheric arcs like a net slowly closing. The Empire panicked. Nobles called for emergency evacuation protocols. Defense sectors braced for war. The Empress's private line lit up with over 4,000 priority signals. But Myra Rain did not flinch. She simply sent a transmission clear and recorded for all to hear. The drone violated our perimeter. We responded in accordance with agreed protocols. No Terran life was lost. We remained still, but only just. Silence returned. But now it was taut. Like a wire pulled to its final thread, and somewhere deep in her throne, Empress Larvin finally understood. This had never been about war. This had always been about balance, and she was no longer the only one holding the scales. A single flicker of misunderstanding can unravel the threads of diplomacy faster than any war cry. It began at the Jalapasan unstable corridor of shifting gravimetric currents at the farthest edge of Teleran territory. A zone typically used for scientific excursions, rarely patrolled, and often overlooked in Imperial navigation grids. But after the Terran fleet's arrival, tensions had sharpened every system like a blade. Patrols doubled. Clearances tightened. The air buzzed with uncertainty, and defense protocols were issued with less oversight and more fear. That day, a small human vessel, its hull white and gleaming, adorned with a universal red cross, passed through the corridor. A medical craft, lightly shielded, carrying vaccines for a nearby mining colony. It bore no weapons, no cloaking, no escort. Its trajectory was logged. Its presence announced, but an overzealous squad of Tyloran interceptors, young and brimming with misplaced zeal, saw something different. They saw an intrusion, an opportunity, a threat they could neutralize to gain favor with the brass. Without formal clearance from Central Command, they engaged. Twin arcs of plasma lanced from their underwings and struck the Terran vessel once, twice, crackling against its shields. The medical ship didn't fire back. It didn't even maneuver. It simply absorbed the hits, its hull groaning, lights flickering. Its broadcast repeated distress calls in a dozen galactic languages. The crew inside, doctors, medics, and a cargo hold filled with life-saving materials, scrambled to stabilize internal systems. Then the unthinkable on their third pass. As the interceptors repositioned to encircle the ship, a sudden gravitational flare common in the Jala Pass destabilized their formation. One interceptor clipped the tail of another mid-spin. The result was instantaneous and catastrophic. A bloom of fire and crystal tore through the void as one ship detonated. The explosion caught its wingmate in the blast radius. Both vessels vanished into a silent inferno. 2 Teleran pilots lost. The footage, captured by the very AI sent to monitor the region, transmitted to Imperial command channels in real time. But somewhere in the transmission chain, whether by accident or a darker hand, it leaked. Within hours, it was everywhere. Screens across the Empire lit up with flashing headlines. 2 pilots dead in human encounter, medical ship or military bait. The human peace mask, SLIPS. The people mourned, not for war, but for the breach in illusion. The Terrans had seemed untouchable, careful, poised, but now, blood had been spilled. Teleran blood. No matter whose hand had caused it, the palace erupted into chaos. Commanders called for retaliation. Senators demanded answers. The Empress's private advisors scrambled to determine the sequence of events. The interceptor corps denied wrongdoing. The human delegation refused to speak to anyone except one. Myra Rain. Bruised. Breathless. Eyes still rimmed with smoke and tears. She stood in the throne hall once more. This time not as an envoy, not as a diplomat, but as a survivor. Her uniform was torn across the shoulder. Her left sleeve still wet with someone else's blood. Oxygen burns marked the side of her face. One side of her braid had come loose, hanging across her cheek like a tattered banner, but she stood tall. And her voice low. Hoarse cut through the silence like a razor. This is why we showed you the warships. The chamber went still. Even the guards at the edge of the throne stairs dared not shift. Myra's gaze didn't waver. She did not shout. She did not plead. But there was a storm in her eyes, a pain she fought to hold at bay. Not to flaunt our strength, not to parade our reach. We showed you because of this. Because this is how wars begin. She took a trembling breath. One wrong decision, one assumption, one moment of fear. And now, there are bodies in the void. The Empress did not speak. Not yet. Her fingers gripped the edge of her armrest. Her eyes were fixed not on the humans, not on her advisors, but on Myra. And for the first time since their encounters began, Myra saw something unexpected in those crystalline eyes. Not anger, not arrogance, not suspicion, but pain, a hollow, silent ache behind the Empress's gaze, deeper than bloodlines and beyond politics. Something ancient. Something buried. Regret. Liovan did not weep. Empresses of her line did not weep. But the flicker in her eyes trembled with the weight of memory. She stood slowly, and the hall shifted. Even the floor beneath Myra seemed to tilt forward with the motion. When she spoke, her voice had lost its sharpness. I once watched 1,000 of my own die. In a battle that began with a single intercepted signal. A misunderstanding we did not correct in time. Her gaze met Myra's unshielded. We burned a star for that error. We scorched 7 moons, and it brought no honor. Only silence. She turned her face toward the great windows, where the Terran ships still lingered in the sky still waiting. I built an empire so that no grief like that would visit our people again. And yet, here we are. Silence fell again. But this time it was shared, heavy, respectful. Then, slowly, Empress Leoven descended the steps of her throne. She approached Myra not as a ruler to a guest, but as one wounded soul to another. When they stood only a breath apart, she looked down at the human woman, the blood still drying on her uniform, and spoke so only she could hear. If peace is to be earned, Captain Rain, then let it begin. With truth, not war. And in that moment, the course of history galactic, history-shifted. Not through a battle, not through a treaty, but through pain, shared, understood, and finally, respected. The following day dawned unlike any in Teleran memory. The capital of Velsharn, with its cascading towers of crystal and spiraling light bridges, usually pulsed with orderly rhythm shuttles arcing through skylanes, forums, humming with bureaucratic choreography. But now the streets had hushed. Screens across plazas paused their usual broadcast of trade news and ceremonial highlights. Airships hovered mid-journey, engines softened to a hush. Even the great temple bells of Tharnal were silenced, and ancient tradition observed only. During moments of monumental importance. At the core of this quiet, the Empress stood. It had been 10 years, a full cycle of the twin suns, Simpress Lyre. Ven had addressed her people directly, not through prepared statements, not through spoke senators, but with her own voice, raw and unfiltered. She stood upon the Celestium dais, a hovering platform above the spire of unity, its base projecting her image and words across every sector of the empire. Her form shimmered in real time across thousands of colonies, orbiting stations, city centers, and sky domes. Her armor glinted silver, but her mantle was absent. Her ceremonial crown left behind. She wore no symbols of conquest that day, only truth. Her voice began, low and resonant, deliberate in its pacing, without the polished rhythms of court language. We have lived long, she said, her gaze sweeping outward, as if meeting the eyes of every soul beyond the horizon. And in that time, we have learned to stand above many. We have carved our legacy into 1,000 worlds and called it stability. We have defined strength by how many bowed before us, and we called it peace. The chamber watching from the palace fell utterly still. But yesterday, she continued. Her words sharpened now, edged in something almost fragile. A vessel of healing was scarred by our hands. 2 of our own lie dead, and an envoy, bruised but unyielding, stood before me not to retaliate but to remind us why they came. She paused. A breath not of weakness, but control. We have underestimated, we have mocked, and we have paid the price. Across the empire, millions stood, still pilots in cockpits, merchants at their stalls, elders in floating gardens, children holding their breath beside education screens. Never before had they heard her speak this way. But we will not repeat history, she said, and now her voice rang not loud, but clear. The humans have offered something rare, Something we once possessed and then lost, respect without conquest, strength without arrogance, purpose without domination. A ripple passed through her advisors standing just beyond frame. Let us meet it not with suspicion, but with something stronger than pride. And then the unexpected, the Empress lifted a hand this time not to command, but to reveal a hologram unfurled behind her, displaying a vast structure suspended in the vacuum of deep space. A new kind of station circular, interlocked with rings of habitat domes and training decks. The banner displayed in both human standard and Tolaran script shimmered across the superstructure, the interstellar Academy of Peace and Defense. Gasps and murmurs flooded watch halls across colonies. Not a fortress, not a battle station, a school built on neutral ground, she continued, between our worlds. Staffed by instructors from both peoples, soldiers will study diplomacy. Diplomats will be trained to defend. Commanders will learn empathy. Scholars will study history from both sides. And there, a generation will rise not shaped by fear, but by understanding. Some in the outer systems whispered disbelief. Others felt their hearts swell, but all watched, breath held, as Lirvan stepped down from the platform, leaving the projection of the academy behind her. She stood at the edge of the dais, alone now, the wind brushing through her silver-white hair. Her gaze not above but below. And slowly, gracefully she bowed, not a court gesture, not a military salute, a real, deliberate bow of the head, a gesture that, in Tolaran culture, was taught only in childhood stories reserved for moments of deep acknowledgement. Deeper resolve. It was not surrender. It was the highest symbol of honor. A collective silence stretched across the empire, as if time itself were waiting, and in the skies above, far beyond the atmosphere, 3,000 Terran warships hung in unbroken formation. A silent wall of steel and possibility. They never fired. They didn't need to, because the message had already been heard. And now it echoed, from asteroid fields to garden moons, from royal halls to refugee shelters. It vibrated through every network, rippled through every translator, reached every being who had once believed humans were ants scuttling beneath the stars. They were not ants. They were the ones who had come bearing torches, not to burn, but to illuminate. Peace was no longer just an agreement. It was a choice, echoed across galaxies, and in that moment across the great arc of history. Two civilizations so different, so distant took their first step together. Not because they had to, but because someone dared to bow first.